The woman took a step back the instant she saw his hand. The tray slipped from her stiffened fingers, struck the stone floor, and shattered into a sound too sharp for a hallway still unlit. And the man standing at the window saw it. He always saw it. For 9 years now, Desmond Rourke had been watching that same step backward, the same small catch of breath, the same hand rising to cover a mouth, as though people feared even their own breathing might brush against his skin. He simply drew the black leather glove a little higher and eased half a step into the shadow where the lamplight could not reach. He did it neatly, the way a man does a thing he has done 1,000 times, because he had. They said the fire that night had taken more from him than his skin. They said he was the one who lit the Kessler building on the south side and let it burn until dawn. They said no woman alive would sit across a dinner table from a man who dragged one ruined leg behind him, who carried the map of a fire across his body, and who was the last of a bloodline that would die with him, because the doctors had said he would never father a child. And Desmond Rourke had stopped arguing a long, long time ago. He ate alone at the head of a table set for 12. He slept alone in the largest room of a house no one dared enter, except the woman who had just stepped back from him, Josephine Marlowe, 27 years old, a single mother who had come knocking at that door, not out of courage, but because she had run out of places to go, did not know one thing. She had not stumbled upon a monster in that hallway. She was standing, in that very second, before the most honest man she would ever meet in her life, a man who kept, in the drawer of his desk, something worth more to him than the building he was standing in, a man whose hand had been touched by exactly one living soul in 9 years, and that soul was 7 years old. If this story touched your heart, please leave a like. Share it with someone you believe needs to hear something warm and comforting today. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel, so we can come together each day and welcome another story filled with kindness. Josie knelt on the stone floor and began picking up the broken pieces one by one, gathering them into the fold of her apron. She worked slowly and carefully, because as long as she was still cleaning up, no one had told her to walk out that door. In her mind, a voice had already finished the calculation. Tomorrow was the day her son had to receive another blood transfusion. Tomorrow was the day someone would once again hand her a sheet of paper covered with numbers she couldn't read through in a single breath. She thought of the refrigerator door in their rented apartment in Brighton Park, where papers like that were stacked beneath an orange-shaped magnet, so thick that the door no longer closed properly. She heard footsteps behind her, and her whole body stiffened as she waited, but no one shouted. An elderly woman merely set a small broom and a tin dustpan beside her. Bernadette Quillen was 68 years old, slightly stooped, and wore a cardigan buttoned all the way up as though an honored guest might arrive at any moment, even though there was no one left in the house then but the two of them. She didn't look at the broken pieces. She looked at Josie's hands. "Those trays break all the time," she said. "Thin silver. They're made to look pretty, not to carry things. Leave it there. I'll get another one from the storeroom later." Josie looked up. "I'm sorry. I didn't know anyone was in the room." "I know you didn't." She said it so calmly that Josie couldn't understand why it sent a deeper chill down her spine than any reprimand could have. "Mrs. Quillen pulled a small chair from the corner of the hallway and sat down, resting both hands on her knees. "Sit. I'll tell you a few things, and after that, whether you stay or leave is up to you. No one is keeping you here." Josie sat on the step with her knees pressed together, the fold of her apron still heavy with shards of silver. "There are 3 forbidden things in this house, Mrs. Quillen said. "First, don't look directly at the master of the house and then quickly turn your face away. Not because he forbids it. He's never forbidden anyone from doing anything like that. But people look at him, then they hurry to look away, and that turning away is far worse. If you think you're going to do that, then it's better not to look at all." She raised one finger. "Second, no one goes up to the 3rd floor after 9 o'clock at night. It doesn't matter who tells you to go up there or why. You come down here and ask me first." A third finger rose. "Third, no one in this house mentions the Kessler building. Not because it's a secret. The whole city has been talking about it for 9 years. So what could possibly be secret about it? It's simply something no one speaks of within these 4 walls." Josie nodded. She had worked in enough houses and heard enough rules to know that the way to survive was to nod first and understand later. "You have a young child, Mrs. Quillen said. It wasn't a question. "1. He's 7. The older woman nodded slowly, her gaze drifting toward the dark end of the hallway. "It's been a very long time since there was the sound of a child in this house." Then she stood and brushed off her knees. "Wash your face, then come down to the kitchen. I have some papers for you to sign." The contract lay on the wooden table beneath a low-hanging lamp. Josie read it very slowly, one line at a time, tracing the edge of the paper with her finger. Then she stopped at the figure showing her weekly wages. She read it again to make certain she hadn't looked at the wrong line. 3 times what the restaurant had paid her before letting her go the month before. 3 times what she had earned anywhere since the day Toby was born. She took the pen, Mrs. Quillen offered, and signed in the blank space, signing quickly, like someone afraid that what lay before her would be taken away if she hesitated for even one more heartbeat. The next morning, on the 4th floor of St. Bridget Hospital, Toby sat in a chair with an infusion line connected to the port beneath his collarbone, folding a paper airplane from the discharge sheet he had received after his last visit. He sharpened the crease with his thumbnail, then wrote Flight 38 across one wing. "Paper airplanes fly farther than real ones, Mom," he said. "That's because they don't have to carry anyone." Josie stood in the doorway and watched her son for a moment, long enough to remember his face exactly as it was then. The face of a child preoccupied with whether he should write the number on the left wing or the right, worried about nothing and knowing nothing at all. Then she looked at the clock on the wall and walked to the far end of the hallway, to a pale wooden door bearing a sign that read, "Family Support Services." 3 people sat on the other side of the table. One held a thin folder, another typed on a tablet. All 3 smiled when she entered, and the person holding the folder poured her a cup of water and pushed it toward her. No one raised their voice. No one frowned. And that was precisely what made Josie's palms grow damp beneath the table, because she had sat before people like them enough times to understand that when they were this polite, it meant everything was being recorded. They asked where she was living, what hours she worked, and who watched the boy in the evenings. They reminded her, very gently, that 2 transfusions had been rescheduled the previous month. They asked whether she considered her current arrangements stable. Not one of the 3 said anything that could be called a threat. Yet in Josie's mind, every question opened the door to another question they hadn't asked. And for many nights, she had lain awake imagining that final question, the one that, if it were ever spoken aloud, would bring everything to an end. She sat with her back straight. She answered each question clearly, without one unnecessary word. She had rehearsed those answers on the number 35 bus, silently forming them with her lips beside the window all the way from the Brighton Park stop to the hospital. And now they came from her mouth so smoothly that even she found it strange. She said she had just found a new job, full-time and steady. She said her new wages would allow her to rearrange the schedule. The person with the tablet typed a few more words and nodded. The person holding the folder said that was wonderful, and the entire meeting ended in less than 20 minutes. Once she reached the hallway, Josie walked straight to the cashier's desk and stood in line behind a man arguing about an insurance code. When her turn came, she accepted the sheet of paper, still warm from the printer, stepped aside, leaned her back against the wall, and read it. She read from the top down, past the service codes, past the deductible, past the equipment fee, until she reached the number inside the bold outlined box in the upper right corner. She read that number once more. Then, in her mind, she placed it beside the figure printed on the contract she had signed in the Rourke House kitchen the night before, the figure 3 times larger than anything she had known, the one that had made her hand tremble as she put pen to paper, and she subtracted one from the other. She stood motionless for a while with the result of that calculation in her mind. Her face didn't change. She folded the paper in half, then into quarters, pressing every edge until it was perfectly straight, the way people fold something they know they'll have to open many more times, then slipped it into the inside pocket of her wool coat, whose elbows had been patched with thread of a different color. She drew a breath. She ran 2 fingers beneath the corners of her eyes, though there was nothing there to wipe away. Then, she turned back toward the room, and before she could even see her son, laughter escaped her from outside the doorway, and Toby looked up from the paper, lifted the airplane high with both hands, his face glowing, and began explaining all over again why Flight 38 would fly farther than every flight that had come before it. On her 4th day of work, as the afternoon drew toward its end, Mrs. Quillen found Josie in the laundry room, and she stood in the doorway longer than seemed necessary for something as simple as what she was about to say. "There's a tray of drinks that needs to be taken upstairs to the study," she said. "The east hallway. The last door." Josie looked up from the stack of towels she was folding. "You told me I wasn't allowed on the 3rd floor after 9 o'clock at night. The study on the 3rd floor is in the west wing. This is somewhere else," she answered a little too quickly, like someone responding to a question she had known in advance would be asked. "You go up now. Right now, no earlier, and no later." Josie looked at her. There was something in the way the older woman stood, her aged hands resting lightly against the sides of her cardigan, her eyes fixed on the patch of wall behind Josie's shoulder instead of looking directly at her, That made Josie want to ask one more question. But she had worked for other people long enough to know that unnecessary questions were never paid for. She set down the towel, washed her hands, and carried the tray upstairs. The last door in the east hallway was made of frosted glass set in a steel frame, and from outside, all she could see were blurred human shapes, like shadows cast on tracing paper. Josie knocked twice. No one answered. She turned the handle with her elbow and pushed the door open, and the first thing that struck her wasn't what she saw, but the silence. There were 5 people in the room, and not one of them breathed loudly enough to be heard. A man around 40 was kneeling on the rug in the center of the room, his arms hanging loosely at his sides, the tails of his shirt pulled free from his waistband, his head bowed. 3 other men stood in an arc behind him. No one touched him. No one moved. And at the far end of the room, seated in a high-backed chair facing the window, one hand resting on the steel cap of the cane standing between his knees, was Desmond Rourke. He didn't shout. He didn't even raise his voice. He spoke evenly and slowly, in the voice of a man reading through an inventory on an otherwise unremarkable afternoon. And that was precisely why every word fell into the room with the weight of stone. "I don't care that you took my money," he said. "I have money. I can even tolerate the fact that you lied to me. I've listened to people lie all my life, but someone is putting my name on refrigerated trailers passing through the Halstead docks. What's inside isn't frozen cargo. It isn't cigarettes. And it isn't liquor. There are people inside, Mr. Delaney. People who are still breathing. The doors are closed. The seals are pulled tight. And my name is on the bill of lading." He paused. Beyond the window, far below, the shadows of the old oak trees lengthened slowly across the gravel driveway in the fading afternoon light. "I'm going to ask you one question, and I'll ask it only once. Who gave you the dye for the seal?" The man kneeling on the rug said something so quietly that Josie couldn't make it out. And at that exact moment, Desmond Rourke turned his head. He looked straight at her. It wasn't a passing glance, nor was it the look of someone who had noticed a person and then dismissed her. He looked at her the way a man looks at a name that has just been added to a list. Josie stood frozen in the doorway with the tray balanced in both hands, aware that the other 3 men had turned to look at her, aware that if she took one step backward now, that step itself would become the answer to a question no one had yet had time to ask. He said nothing to her. He merely tipped his chin toward the low table on the right. That was all. Josie entered the room, crossed the rug, walked past the kneeling man, and did everything she could to make her steps appear ordinary. She set the tray on the table without allowing a single glass to touch another. Then she turned and walked out. She didn't run. She closed the frosted glass door behind her softly and carefully, the way someone closes the door to a room where another person is sleeping. That evening, Josie didn't take the bus home right away. She walked all the way down the Beverly Hill to the avenue, both hands buried in the pockets of her coat. And inside the left pocket, her fingers kept touching the folded sheet of paper through the fabric. She sat on the bench at the bus stop beneath a lamp where a moth beat its wings against the plastic cover. One bus arrived. She didn't get on. Another came. Its doors opened. The driver gave her a questioning look. Then the doors closed, and the bus pulled away. She sat there as the northern sky changed from deep blue to absolute black. And she thought about the room with the frosted glass door. And she thought about the words, "people who are still breathing." And she thought that perhaps in the morning she should call the old diner and ask for a night shift, or call the office cleaning company over on Cicero, or call anywhere else at all. Her hand touched the paper in her pocket again. She sat there until the last bus arrived, and she boarded that one, and for the entire ride home she didn't look out the window even once. The next morning, while the streetlights were still burning, Josephine Marlowe stood before the iron gates of the Rourke estate, rang the bell, and went inside to work as she did every day. "Mrs. Quillen opened the door for her. She didn't ask Josie a single question. But on the 3rd floor, behind the study window, a man stood half a step back in the darkness, looking down. And he had been standing there for a long time before she arrived, because he needed an answer, and now he had it. The babysitter in Brighton Park called Josie on Saturday morning to say that her son had a fever, and she couldn't take in any other children that day. And Josie stood in the apartment kitchen, with the phone pressed to her ear, looking at her son as he sat by the door putting on his shoes, and she understood that she had no other choice. It was the day of rest between 2 transfusions, the day when Toby always had more energy than on any other day of the week, the day when he talked twice as much as usual. She brought a stack of paper for him, and told him to sit quietly in the small room beside the kitchen, not to go anywhere, and not to touch anything. And Toby nodded with all the solemnity a 7-year-old child could put into a single nod. But the small room beside the kitchen had a door that opened onto the back porch, and that door wasn't locked. And beyond it lay a garden enclosed by stone walls, with faded hydrangea bushes, and an old magnolia tree leaning toward the south. And a child who had been lying in an infusion chair only 2 days earlier couldn't possibly resist a place like that. So when Josie finished cleaning the second floor and came back downstairs to find her son, the little room was empty. Toby was sitting on the third stone step leading down to the garden, the stack of paper open across his knees, because there was no wind inside the house. And he had explained to himself very clearly that paper airplanes needed wind. He heard the steel brace striking the brick path along the flower beds before he saw the man. Tap, drag, tap, drag. He looked up. Desmond Rourke stopped about 3 steps away from him. He was making his circuit around the garden as he did every morning, the only item in his schedule that no one was permitted to record, and he had walked around that garden for years without ever encountering anyone. He stood still. He waited for the recoil. He waited for the sharp breath, for the hand rising to cover the mouth, for the hurried turning away that he had learned to recognize before it even happened. Toby tilted his head to one side and asked, "What are you doing here?" "I live here," he said. "Oh." The boy looked down and sharpened another crease, then looked up again. "I'm Toby. My mom cleans your house. She told me to sit in there, but there isn't any wind in there, and paper airplanes need wind to fly. You can try it and see." He didn't answer. The morning sunlight slanted in from behind him, and he realized a moment too late that it was shining directly on his right hand where it rested on the head of his cane, the hand he hadn't put a glove on because there had never been anyone in the garden in the morning before. He began pulling down his sleeve. Toby had already seen it. The boy leaned forward. "Oh," he said. "You have them too?" Then, before Desmond could understand what he meant, Toby set the stack of paper on the stone step, pulled aside the collar of his sweater, and showed him the infusion port beneath his collarbone. "I have this," he said, "and I have these too." He pushed up his sleeve and pointed to the faded marks from old needles at the inside of his left elbow. "These are old, so they're fading. The nurse said they'll keep fading and fading until you can't see them anymore, but I think they'll still be there." He turned his arm back and forth several times, looking thoroughly pleased, as though he were displaying a collection. Then he looked at the man's hand, studying it with the direct, earnest concentration of a child comparing 2 things of the same kind. "You have a lot more than I do." "Yes," he said. It was the only word he could find. "Then you're better at it than I am." He didn't understand. "Why would that make me better?" "Because having more means you've done it more times," Toby said in the voice of a child forced to explain something obvious to an adult who was a little slow to understand. Then he rose from the stone step, took 2 steps forward, and held that hand between both of his own, turning it over to examine it in the sunlight. "Your hand is so cold," he said. Desmond Rourke stood motionless. Something broke very softly somewhere behind his ribcage, so softly that no one heard it, not even him. Then came the sound of running footsteps on the porch. Josie rushed down the stone steps, her face drained white, and pulled her son away from him so quickly that the stack of paper fell onto the step below. She held Toby tightly against her chest and began apologizing in the breathless voice of someone who had already imagined the consequences before she had even understood what was happening. She apologized because the boy had gone outside. She apologized for bringing him there. She said it would never happen again. She said she would finish cleaning the second floor and take her son home right away, right now, immediately. Desmond Rourke looked at the mother and child, slowly, with the difficulty of a man who had to place his weight very carefully on one leg. He bent down and picked up the paper airplane lying on its side upon the stone step. "You forgot Flight 41, he said. Then he handed it to her, turned away, and continued his circuit around the garden. Tap, drag, until he disappeared behind the hydrangea bushes. The story of a hired man named Wendell Pike was told to Josie in the basement kitchen, at the hour when the household staff sat around the long table, eating a late meal, and nearly every light on the floors above had been turned off. "Mrs. Quillen told it while wiping her hands on her apron, her voice lowered even though there were only 4 people in the kitchen. Pike had worked for the family for 11 years, keeping the warehouse ledgers. He had a wife, 2 grown children, and every summer he brought tomatoes from his garden down to share with everyone in the kitchen. Then, in the spring of the previous year, they discovered that he had been slipping a few things out. No one touched him, Mrs. Quillen emphasized that part. No one waited for him in the parking lot. No police car arrived, and there wasn't a sound of any kind. The master of the house simply told him he could leave. That was all. Pike walked out through the front door and drove himself home. After that, no one in the industry ever returned his calls again. Even the little paint shop owned by his brother-in-law suddenly had no need for another worker. Mrs. Quillen stopped there and picked up a cloth to wipe the tabletop, though it was already clean. "He's in Indiana now," she said. "Somewhere near the border, from what I hear." Josie sat quietly, both hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had gone cold, and thought of the level voice in the room with the frosted glass door. The voice that hadn't risen even once. That night, the wind changed. It blew in from the lake and struck the old-fashioned windows of the mansion, making them rattle in their frames. And Josie, who was finishing the cleaning in the small dining room on the ground floor, heard the steel brace in the stone hallway. That uneven rhythm sounded different that night. It was slower, the pause between each sound longer, and once she heard the tip of the cane strike the wall, as though the person walking needed one more place to lean. She stood still with the cleaning cloth in her hand. Then she went down to the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, and began to cook. She didn't ask anyone. She made corn and potato soup with onions and a little bacon, the same thing she always made for Toby on nights when the weather changed. Her mother's recipe, a dish with nothing remarkable about it except that it was hot. It was thick, and it helped people sleep. She ladled it into a bowl, placed it on a tray with a spoon and a slice of bread, then carried it upstairs. He was sitting in the reading room, his right leg stretched out on a low stool, his cane lying on the floor. He looked at the tray, then at her. "I didn't order any food." "Yes, sir." She set the tray on the small table beside him. "My mother's knee used to hurt whenever the weather changed. Medicine helped her sleep for 3 hours. This helped her sleep for 5. I don't know what it'll do for you, but it's hot, and you lose nothing if you don't eat it." He didn't answer. She had nearly reached the door when she heard the spoon touch the side of the bowl behind her. "How old is the boy?" he asked. Josie stopped at the threshold. 7. The tube in his chest. "His bone marrow can't make blood on its own anymore," she said, "so they have to give him transfusions. Twice a week, on the 4th floor of St. Bridget Hospital." He ate another spoonful. "Since when?" "Since he was almost 4. She stood there, one hand still resting on the doorframe, listening to herself speak of things she had never discussed in any place where she had worked. And she didn't understand why she was speaking of them now. "They told me everything would be different if they could find a bone marrow donor who matched him. But finding a match is difficult, so we have to wait. And while we're waiting, we have to keep him stable. And keeping him stable means going every week. He can't miss a single appointment. If he misses one, everything falls behind." "How do you pay for it?" "Insurance covers part of it." She was silent for a moment. "I pay the rest." He asked no more questions. He slowly finished the entire bowl of soup without looking at her again, and when he set down the spoon, she understood that the conversation was over, so she picked up the tray and walked out. When she reached the threshold, he spoke one final sentence without turning his head. "Too salty." "Yes, sir," Josie said. "I'll use less salt tomorrow." The next morning, just as Josie reached the bus stop, the phone in her pocket began to vibrate. The call was from the hospital billing office. The woman on the other end spoke very quickly, her voice cheerful as though she were telling Josie she had just won a prize, and said that the entire outstanding balance on pediatric patient Toby Marlowe's account had been paid. Not only the overdue portion, but also an advance large enough to cover every treatment from then through the end of the following year. Josie stood at the bus stop, holding the phone in one hand and gripping the lamppost with the other. She asked who had paid it. The woman said the person who made the payment had requested that the information remain confidential. Josie asked again. The answer didn't change. That morning, she let the bus pull away without boarding it, and she took a taxi to Beverly, something she hadn't done once in 4 years, and went straight up to the study, even though it was still far too early, and even though she had been told that door kept its own hours. He was sitting behind his desk with a pen in his hand and a stack of papers before him. He didn't seem surprised to see her. Josie stood in the middle of the room, her chest still rising and falling from her haste, and said that she couldn't accept it, that she would find a way to repay it, that she needed to know the exact amount so she could calculate how long it would take. Desmond Rourke set down his pen. "How long have you been standing here?" he said. 3 minutes. "During those 3 minutes, how many times did you think about that number?" She couldn't answer. "I'm not buying you, Miss Marlowe, and I don't give to charity. Ask anyone in this house and not one of them will tell you I'm a kind man. I paid that bill because an employee who is constantly adding and subtracting numbers in her head can't do her job. I bought peace and quiet. It was far less expensive than you think." He picked up his pen and lowered his eyes to the stack of papers. Josie remained where she was for exactly one more heartbeat. She had worked for other people long enough to know when a man was lying, and she also knew that there were some lies one wasn't permitted to expose, because once they were exposed, The person who had told them would have nowhere left to stand, so she merely thanked him, very softly, then walked out and closed the door behind her. For him, that part was easy. He had so much money that giving it away was no longer something he had to consider. And giving away what one had in abundance had never been difficult for anyone. The difficult part, the thing he had never carried within himself and would have to learn from the beginning like a grown man learning how to hold a pen, wouldn't come until much later. Josie saw the dark stain one weekend morning while she was cleaning the second-floor hallway, when the light from the window in the gable fell across the stone floor at an angle it ordinarily never reached. If the light had fallen anywhere else, she might have walked past without noticing, but it fell on that exact spot, and against the gray stone was a small mark that had dried to a deep brown, then another mark about one step away, smaller than the first, and then another. They led toward the door at the end of the hallway. Josie straightened, picked up her bucket, and followed them, telling herself she was doing it because cleaning was her job, though she knew perfectly well that wasn't the reason. The door at the end of the hallway stood open by the width of a hand. From inside came the smell of antiseptic alcohol, that sharp, cold scent she had breathed in twice a week for 4 years, the scent her nose recognized before her mind had time to understand what it meant. He was sitting on a stool before the large mirror in the dressing room, with the desk lamp pulled to one side to give him more light. On the stone surface beside him lay an open tin box, several pieces of gauze, a small bottle, and a spool of thread. He was trying to twist himself around in front of the mirror so he could see clearly, doing it alone, without anesthetic, making no sound except for the steady passage of breath through his nose. Josie stood frozen in the narrow opening of the door. She had seen many things during 4 years on the 4th floor of the hospital, and she had trained herself not to flinch, but it wasn't the sight of his shoulder that sent a chill down her spine. It was his calmness. It was the way he did it, as though he were a man shaving on an ordinary Tuesday morning. He saw her in the mirror. Get out. She didn't leave. She set the bucket on the floor, stepped inside, and heard her footsteps echo more loudly than usual against the stone. She moved closer, stood behind his shoulder, looked at his hands in the mirror, and said the first thing that came into her mind. You're holding the needle backward. He raised his eyes. She held out her hand. He didn't give it to her. They looked at each other through the mirror for 3 breaths. Then he opened his hand, and she took the needle from his fingers. Josie pulled over a second stool, sat down behind his shoulder, and began. First, she washed her hands with the alcohol from the bottle, the step he had skipped. Then she disinfected the skin around the wound again with clean gauze, 3 times, using a fresh piece each time, exactly as she had watched the nurses on the 4th floor do hundreds of times. Her hands didn't tremble. She had completed a first aid course before her son became ill, and 4 years spent sitting beside a hospital bed had taught her everything else. Through those endlessly long afternoons, when the only thing she could do to keep herself from losing her mind was watch closely and remember, she worked slowly and neatly, and from beginning to end, he didn't move or say a word. He merely stared into the mirror before him as though there were something in it worth seeing. It's done, she said. She applied a fresh bandage, smoothed down all 4 corners of the tape, then checked the edge one more time. After that, she reached out, took his right hand where it rested on his thigh, and gave it 2 gentle squeezes. She did it without thinking. It was the gesture she always used with Toby after fastening his bandage. 2 soft squeezes that meant it was over, that meant you did so well, that meant let's go home. She had done it hundreds of times, with a hand only half the size of this one. Her hand moved before her mind did, and by the time her thoughts caught up, it was too late. He didn't pull his hand away. He lowered his eyes. He looked at the hand of a house cleaner, resting on the back of his own. Then he spoke in a dry, low voice without looking at her. Doesn't it disgust you? It wasn't a question. Josie heard that immediately. It was an accusation, a door he had opened in advance so she could walk out. The way a man who had lived too long inside a shell handed someone else the hammer so the shell could remain intact. He needed her to lie. He needed her to pull back her hand, stammer, and leave, so everything could return to its proper place, so he could still know where he stood. Josie gathered the soiled gauze into her palm and rose. I see an old burn that didn't heal properly, she said. Either they didn't graft enough skin, or they did the graft and never gave you proper rehabilitation afterward, so the tissue contracted and pulled the tendons with it. You can't rotate your wrist all the way. I could tell from the way you hold a coffee cup. You should have received much better treatment back then. That's all. She picked up her bucket. The bandage needs to be changed in 3 days. Call me. Don't do it yourself. Your right hand can't reach that spot. Then, She walked out, closed the door, went downstairs to empty the bucket. And by then, the only thing in her mind was the list of tasks she still had to finish before noon. She didn't know. She went all the way down the staircase without knowing that she had just spoken the kindest words the man sitting in that room had ever heard in his life, that he was still sitting motionless before the mirror, with one hand resting in the exact place where hers had just released it, and that from that morning forward, something inside him had changed, something he didn't yet know how to name, and she would be the last person in the world to discover it. The call came on Tuesday evening, just as Josie had finished walking from the bus stop to the end of her street in Brighton Park, carrying a paper bag with milk and 2 new packs of colored paper she had bought at the corner store. The screen showed an unfamiliar number, with an area code from another state. She almost didn't answer. She had made a habit of ignoring unfamiliar numbers, because in the past 4 years, not one of them had ever called with good news. But her finger slid across the screen before her mind could decide, and she raised the phone to her ear and said hello, and the other end remained silent for exactly 2 breaths. Then a man's voice said, "Little Josie." The paper bag slipped from her hand and fell onto the sidewalk. The carton of milk rolled into the gutter. There are some sounds a person never needs to hear twice. She hadn't heard that voice in 4 years, had spent 4 years trying not to hear it inside her head on nights when she couldn't sleep. Yet it was exactly the same, still drawing out the final syllable in that same way, still carrying the feeling that the man speaking was smiling even when he wasn't. Josie stood on the sidewalk beneath the streetlight, and in the silence, she could hear her heart beating in both ears. "You're still alive," she said. "Alive and well." Something sounded on the other end like ice striking the sides of a glass. "You don't sound very happy to hear it. What do you want?" "Just to talk. It's been a long time." He was silent for a moment. Then his voice changed, becoming softer and more intimate, and it was that softness that sent a chill down her spine. "I heard you changed jobs. Up in Beverly. Big house, isn't it? The one with the iron gates and the 2 oak trees by the entrance." Josie didn't answer. She stared at the carton of milk lying in the gutter and didn't bend down to retrieve it. "How do you know?" she asked. "People talk. Chicago is a very small place, sweetheart. You think it's big, but it's really no larger than the palm of your hand." He gave a quiet laugh. "I'm happy for you. I really am. A place like that must pay well. What do you want, Cole?" "That study on the 3rd floor. The room with the oak door. There's a desk inside. The 2nd drawer on the left. Inside it is a brown leather ledger, about this thick. You'll recognize it as soon as you open the drawer. I don't need you to take it. I don't need you to touch anything else. All you have to do is open it and take pictures. Photograph every single page." He paused. "But don't send them to this number. I'll text you another one. Send them there. Once it's done, I'll disappear, and you'll never have to hear my voice again." "No." "All right." He said it with complete calmness, as though he had anticipated her answer long ago. "Do you remember those loan papers from Eastern Savings? From when I opened the salvage yard? You signed on the 2nd line. You have beautiful handwriting." "I still remember it." Josie closed her eyes. "You've made every payment for the past 4 years. I checked. Every month without fail. Not one missed payment. Even during the months when you had nothing to pay with. It's all in the records. Every last dollar." His voice remained light, as though they were discussing the weather. "But that debt belongs to both of us, Josie. My name is on it too. That means I have a share in it. If I file a request to settle my portion, they'll reopen the entire loan from the beginning. All of it. The 4 years of payments you've made will be recalculated from the date you signed. Then they'll send a letter to your new place of employment. They'll send it to that house in Beverly, right to the gates, asking whether the woman who cleans their house is the same woman involved in an out-of-court debt dispute. Do you think people who live in houses like that enjoy receiving letters like those? Would you really do it?" Josie said, and her voice was so quiet that even she found it strange. "I don't want to. I mean that." She heard him exhale. "I only need a few photographs. For you, it's 5 minutes spent opening a drawer. For me, it's an entire lifetime. Who are you working for?" "You don't need to know that. Who are you working for, Cole?" "You have until the end of this week," he said. "This number will remain active." The call ended. Josie stood beneath the streetlight for a very long time. Then she bent down and retrieved the carton of milk from the gutter, wiped it against the hem of her coat, placed the 2 packs of colored paper back inside the bag with the torn corner, and walked the rest of the way home. On the 3rd floor, beyond the kitchen window, there was a pool of warm yellow light and the shadow of a small head bent over the table. Josie stood in the street and looked up at that window for about a minute. Then she took the key from her pocket, unlocked the door downstairs, climbed the stairs, and by the time she stepped into the apartment, Her face had returned to normal. She held up the 2 packs of paper and said the store had metallic paper that day. And she had bought both packs, because the other one contained several sheets of turquoise. Josie saw the article on the bus Thursday morning, on the phone screen of the man sitting in front of her, and she had read almost the entire headline before she understood who it was about. When she got off at her stop, she stood on the sidewalk at the street corner, opened it on her own phone, and read it again from the beginning. The article was very long. It didn't call him a criminal. It was far cleverer than that. It merely placed certain facts beside one another, facts that any reader would connect without being told, and it did so very slowly. It mentioned the night of the Kessler building. It noted that the investigation had closed without reaching any conclusion. It quoted an anonymous source in the industry, who said that an entire warehouse network shouldn't be entrusted to a man under whose control that same network had once burned. Then, halfway through the article, it turned to an entirely different matter, one that had nothing to do with docks or warehouses, and it described that matter in a voice of false pity more humiliating than any insult could have been. It said that according to medical records obtained by the newspaper, this man would never have an heir, then asked whether a family line with no one left to continue it should be allowed to retain control of such a fortune. Beneath that passage, taking up nearly half the page, was a photograph. It had been taken from behind and slightly to one side, beneath the murky yellow light of the hallway lamps. A man sat with his shoulders bare on a stool before a large mirror. The picture had been taken through the opening of a door, taken in secret. Josie recognized the room immediately. She had sat inside it. She had cleaned the floor just outside that door. For the second time in 4 years, she took a taxi. She went straight through the iron gates and crossed the foyer without taking off her coat or setting down her bag, then went directly upstairs to the study, and this time she didn't knock. He was sitting behind his desk. A printed copy of the article lay open before him beside a half-finished cup of coffee. He looked up at her, then at the paper in her hand, and he didn't appear surprised in the slightest. "Have you read this?" Josie said. Her voice trembled from haste, and from something else as well. "This photograph was taken inside the house. It was taken in that room on the 2nd floor. Someone in this house stood outside that opening. Do you understand? Someone was standing right there while you were sitting inside alone, and you had no idea. And now it's in the newspaper for the entire city to see. You have to call your lawyers. You have to make them take it down. You have to do something." Desmond Rourke lifted his coffee cup and took a sip. 3 weeks, he said. Josie stopped short. "What did you say?" "I've known for 3 weeks that this article was going to be published. I know who arranged it. And I even know the name of the person who approved it for publication." He set down his cup and turned the paper until it lay perfectly straight. "I could have stopped it. 2 phone calls during the first week would have been enough." "Then why?" "Because I needed that photograph." She stared at him, unable to understand. He placed one finger along the edge of the picture and turned the paper toward her. "Look at the angle. It was taken through the opening of the door, at the eye level of someone standing in the hallway, slightly to the left because that door opens in that direction. That means the photographer was standing in the 2nd floor hallway. I know the exact time. I know which door they passed through to reach the place where they stood." He looked down at the paper for a moment. 29 people come and go from this house. 3 weeks ago, I didn't know which one of those 29 people it was. If I had stopped the article, I never would have known. This photograph was the only thing that could show me where that person was standing and when. He looked up. "Now I know." Josie stood there with the paper in her hand, listening to a lawnmower running in the neighboring garden, and couldn't speak. "You let them publish that part," she finally said. "The part about you not being able to have children. You let them put it in the newspaper for the entire city to read, just to get one name." "Yes. Don't you feel anything at all?" Desmond Rourke lowered his eyes to the photograph on the desk. He looked at it longer than necessary, and as he stared, his left hand rose and pulled the glove on his right hand a little higher, until it completely covered his wrist. He made the movement without realizing he was doing it. Then he looked up, and his voice remained exactly as it had been, without rising by even a single note. "Miss Marlowe, 29 people in this house live on my money. More than 400 others at the docks do as well. Someone is using my name to do things that would keep you from sleeping if I told you about them. I need to find that person. I need to find them quickly. And the price I have to pay is allowing a newspaper to print something this entire city has whispered behind my back for 9 years." He picked up the paper, folded it in half, and placed it in a drawer. "People can only say about me what I allow them to say. That isn't a loss. It's an expense." He pulled the stack of papers toward him and picked up his pen. "Go back to work. And Miss Marlowe," he didn't raise his head, "from now on, don't clean the 2nd floor hallway in the morning. Let someone else do it. The hospital car was supposed to stop in front of Josie's home in the middle of Friday morning. The same car that hadn't missed a single trip in 4 years, whose driver always gave 2 short blasts of the horn when he reached the end of the street. That morning, there was no horn. Josie called the dispatch office. They told her to hold, then told her to wait a little longer, then came back and said the car was stuck on Archer, that there had been an accident, and both lanes were completely motionless. She called a taxi. The taxi dispatcher said it would be 35 minutes. She opened a ride service application, and every driver reported the same thing, the same road, the same obstruction in the same place. She carried Toby downstairs and walked to the end of the street, and there she saw a line of motionless cars stretching west as far as she could see, red taillights glowing along the entire length of the block, and she saw a truck lying sideways across both lanes, with 2 cars wedged tightly against either side of it, all 3 vehicles sealing off the entire road like 3 chess pieces, placed there by a hand that knew exactly what it was doing. There was no ambulance. There were no police. The 3 drivers stood together on the sidewalk smoking, and not one of them was arguing with anyone. Josie stood there holding her son in her arms, and felt a coldness run down her spine. Not fear of what was happening, but the fear born from understanding that it hadn't happened by itself. Toby was more tired than usual that day. He had fallen asleep twice while his mother was dressing him, his skin even paler than its customary pallor. And when Josie asked how he felt, he merely said, "I'm just sleepy, Mom," then let his head fall against her neck. It had been 2.5 days since his last transfusion. Josie knew exactly what 2.5 days meant. She took out her phone, scrolled down, and called a number she had never used before. The number Mrs. Quillen required every member of the household staff to save during their first week. He answered after the second ring. Josie spoke too quickly, without beginning or end, and afterward she couldn't remember what she had said. She only remembered saying Archer, saying that no vehicle could get through, saying 2.5 days. The other end was silent for exactly 1 heartbeat. "Where are you standing?" "The corner of 47th and Kedzie." "Stay there." 13 minutes later, a long black sedan pulled up beside the curb. The driver's door opened. There was no one else in the car. Desmond Rourke had driven there himself, alone, his shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows, his right hand bare because the glove made his grip slip on the steering wheel, and he leaned on his cane as he walked around the front of the car to open the rear door for the mother and child. "Sit in the back with the boy," he said. He didn't follow the line of traffic. He turned left at the first intersection, drove along a street lined with rows of red brick houses, then turned right, then turned again, and Josie realized he was heading toward the harbor. He traveled along roads a person could live an entire lifetime in Chicago without ever knowing existed. Lanes running between container yards, patched stretches of asphalt following freight tracks, curves trapped between 2 corrugated metal walls where the sunlight reached the ground in only 1 narrow strip. He didn't drive fast. He drove steadily, 1 hand on the steering wheel, without saying a word. And in the rearview mirror, Josie saw his jaw tighten every time he had to press down with his right foot. In the back seat, Toby found a receipt in the compartment between the 2 front seats. He folded it into an airplane, wrote Flight 44 across one wing, then announced that this car was much bigger than the hospital car. He asked whether they would cross the big bridge that afternoon. He said his class was holding a science fair the following week, and everyone had to bring something. He knew nothing. In his mind, this was a special morning. A ride in an unfamiliar car with an unfamiliar man, traveling down unfamiliar roads filled with cranes, while beyond the window there were ships, water, and seagulls perched on pilings. He was still talking when the car left the harbor district, still talking when it reached the main road heading north. Then his voice gradually grew quieter. His head settled against his mother's shoulder, and he fell asleep. The car stopped outside the pediatric emergency department. Desmond Rourke opened his door, rose with the support of his cane, and walked around to open the rear door. Josie was struggling to release the seatbelt with both hands trembling. He bent down, slipped one arm beneath the boy's back and the other beneath his knees, then lifted him with both arms. The cane slipped from his hand, fell to the ground, rolled once across the sidewalk, and lay still. He didn't pick it up. He couldn't pick it up. He climbed the 5 steps leading to the automatic glass doors, and with every step, his entire weight came down on the right leg that hadn't been able to bear even his own weight for 9 years. And he didn't stop. And he didn't allow the child's head to fall backward, and he walked straight past the reception desk and inside. Josie ran behind him, and when she reached the door, she looked back only once, and saw the steel-capped wooden cane lying on the sidewalk beside the car's wheel, abandoned in broad daylight, before the eyes of everyone. 40 minutes later, a young doctor came into the hallway looking for her. He held the test results in his hand and said that Toby's levels were farther outside the normal range that day than at any other time in his medical records, said they had already begun treatment and that he would be all right. Then paused for a moment before finishing. If you'd arrived any later, there would have been nothing we could do. Josie sank onto the nearest plastic chair. At the far end of the hallway, a man stood with one shoulder leaning against the wall, one hand gripping the stainless steel rail that ran along it, the right hand covered in scars that the entire city had never dared to look at directly, and he remained there for a very long time, until someone brought his cane in from the sidewalk and returned it to him. Josie opened that drawer on Monday afternoon, 3 days after the drive to the hospital, when no one remained in the house but her, and the sound of a vacuum cleaner drifting up from the floor below. All weekend, she had told herself she wouldn't do it, and she believed that, until the exact moment her hand closed around the handle of the second drawer on the left, the brown leather ledger lay exactly where Cole had said it would be. It was thick, the edges of its pages yellowed with age, and inside were columns of handwritten numbers and rows of symbols she didn't understand at all. She took one photograph. Then she turned each page and photographed it, holding the edge of the paper flat with one hand, working with the cold concentration of someone who had separated herself from her own body long enough to finish what had to be done. Then she returned the ledger to its exact place, pushed the drawer closed, went downstairs, and finished her shift. That night, she sat on the kitchen floor of the Brighton Park apartment, with her back against a cabinet door and the phone lying face up on her knees. In the next room, Toby was asleep, breathing steadily, one hand still holding the turquoise crayon. Josie opened a new message addressed to the number Cole had sent her. She attached the photographs. She stared at the send button. The screen went dark because she had waited too long, so she touched it to bring the light back, then looked at the button once more. She thought of the letter that could be delivered to the iron gates in Beverly. She thought of 4 years of debt payments being erased and recalculated from the beginning, from the day she signed. Then she thought of a man climbing 5 steps with her son in his arms, and a cane lying abandoned on the sidewalk behind him. She sat there until the first gray light crept across the kitchen window frame. She didn't send the message. She didn't delete it either. The next morning, she went up to the study, placed the phone on the desk before him with the first photograph already open on the screen, then stood straight. "I took them," she said, photographs of the entire ledger in the second drawer. "Monday afternoon. The person who told me to do it was my older brother. His name is Cole Marlowe. He called me last week from a number in another state, and I don't know who he's working for. I meant to send them. I sat with this phone all night, and in the end, I didn't. But I took the photographs, and I can't deny that." She drew a breath. "You can do whatever you want to me. I'm asking only one thing. Don't touch my son's hospital." Desmond Rourke looked down at the screen. He didn't pick up the phone. He stared at it for a very long time. Long enough for Josie to hear the pendulum clock in the hallway strike twice. "You missed 3 pages, he said. Page 41, page 42, and the final page. They're stuck together because of the damp." He looked up. "Those 3 pages are what they really need. Sit down, Miss Marlowe." She didn't sit. "You already knew. Since Monday afternoon, 2 hours and 17 minutes after you closed the drawer." He pushed the phone toward her with 2 fingers. That phone had been connected to his system from the day she put pen to the contract in the kitchen downstairs. 29 people worked in that house, and all 29 phones were connected in the same way. It wasn't only hers. "Then why didn't you call the police? Why didn't you fire me that same day?" "Because I was waiting to see whether you would send them." He rose, took 2 steps toward the window, and in the daylight, Josie saw what she hadn't noticed when she entered. His eyes were sunken, his face unshaven, and the shirt he wore was still the one from the day before. 3 days, he said. "If you sent them, the number on the other end would reveal itself. From that number, I could trace the person paying for it, and in another 2 weeks, I would have the name of the person who put my seal on the trailers passing through Halstead. Do you understand? You were the shortest path I had found in 2 years. All I had to do was sit still and let you do what you were about to do. Then why are you telling me?" Josie's voice broke. "Why didn't you just keep waiting?" He turned and looked at her. "Last night, I sat outside your kitchen window. The entire room fell silent. My car was parked half a block away. I sat inside it from before dark. I watched the light in your kitchen burn all night. I never saw you turn it off. I sat there waiting for a message to be sent, and when morning came, there still hadn't been one, so I drove home." He spoke the next sentence very slowly, like a man setting down something he had carried on his shoulders for far too long. "I intended to use you, Miss Marlowe. I planned it very carefully, and I didn't feel guilty for a single second until this morning. Now I can't use you anymore. That is my problem, not yours." Josie stood there with both hands clenched together, and something inside her chest broke apart. But what broke wasn't relief. "The cold room," she said. "He didn't answer. That day, Mrs. Quillen told me to carry the tray up to that exact room at that exact time." She stumbled over her words. "She wouldn't look at me. I had worked here for only 4 days, and I just happened to open that particular door at that particular moment. Do you think that door opened by itself?" Josie closed her eyes for exactly 1 heartbeat. "I needed to know what kind of person you were," he said. "There are 3 kinds. The kind who runs away that same night and never returns. The kind who goes outside and tells someone else in exchange for something. And the kind who rings the bell on time the next morning. I needed to know which kind you were, and I needed to know before you had been in this house for more than a week. You knew I had a young child. You knew I had nowhere else to go. You knew I would have to come back no matter what I saw in that room." "Yes," he said. "I knew." Josie stepped forward. She hadn't argued with anyone in 4 years. She had learned that poor people couldn't afford to argue, but now something inside her had slipped beyond her control. "What about Mr. Pike? He has 2 children. Did you know that?" Her breathing quickened. "You sit there and tell me you can't use me anymore, as though that were an act of kindness. But you're still the man who did that to him." Desmond Rourke showed no reaction. "A man who leaks information to the people using my name has only 2 possible endings," he said. "Either I cut off every way he has of earning a living in this city, so the other side sees that he's no longer of any value, or I leave him alone, allow him to continue working somewhere in the industry, and let the other side understand that he can still be useful." He looked directly into her eyes. "Do you want me to be kind, or do you want him to remain alive? Choose." "I already did, and I've slept very well for the past year." Josie opened her mouth, but nothing came out. He sat down behind the desk again and pushed the phone toward her once more. "Take it home. Don't delete those photographs." He picked up his pen, then stopped. "And from now on, every time he calls, you tell me." She didn't leave right away. Perhaps if he had said one more sentence, she would have gone, but he said nothing. He merely sat there with his pen suspended above the page, and that silence opened a space she stepped into before she even realized she was doing it. "Do you want to know why I'm still tied to that debt?" she said. He set down the pen. She pulled out the chair in front of the desk and sat, both hands resting in her lap, her eyes fixed on a spot on the wooden surface instead of on him. Toby was 2.5 when the creditors knocked on the door. The first time, they were polite. The third time, they came to her workplace and spoke to the manager, and she lost her job that same day. Then the notices began appearing on her door. She didn't understand. She understood only that as long as she remained at that address, they could find her. "So I left," she said. "Where did you go?" "Nowhere. I had an old Corolla my father left me. I abandoned everything else and kept only our clothes in the child's seat. Then I drove away." She raised one hand, then lowered it into her lap again. 3 months. He said nothing. "I had a job. Don't think I sat around doing nothing. I washed dishes on the evening shift at a diner over in Dundalk. The owner paid me in cash, so no one asked for any documents. During the day, I left Toby at a church daycare. They charged by the hour, and it was cheap. I parked behind a supermarket that stayed open all night because there were lights and security cameras. He still went to school every day. He still had milk. He still had a hot meal. I could manage that much." Her voice remained steady, and that was the most frightening thing about the way she told the story. "There was only one thing I couldn't manage. Insurance. Losing her job meant losing her insurance. Without a permanent address, she couldn't submit an application for assistance. Without an application, there was no insurance. And without insurance, no one would examine a child who appeared healthy merely for a routine checkup. During those 3 months, he didn't see a doctor once. Not once. Outside the window, a bird cried twice, then fell silent. After that, I found a place to rent in Brighton Park. Once I had an address, I could replace the paperwork, and I took him to the doctor. They ran tests, then called me into a room. The doctor said Toby had carried this disease since birth. It was congenital. That meant it had been there while he was still inside me. It meant that no matter what I did or didn't do, it would have been there." She swallowed. Then he said one more thing. He said that if they had discovered it earlier, there was a treatment plan that could have kept him stable much longer, possibly even into adulthood. Then he asked when Toby had last received a routine examination. Josie looked up for the first time since she had begun speaking. "The doctor said things might have been different if they had known sooner. But I don't have a sooner, Mr. Rourke. I don't have those 3 months to give back to anyone. I have only now, and now means twice a week. She was silent for a very long time. I haven't told anyone this story in 4 years. Not because I'm ashamed that we lived in a car. What is there to be ashamed of? There are so many people all across America who have to live in their cars. A very brief laugh escaped her, though it wasn't really laughter. It's because of this. She took out her phone, swiped across the screen several times, then placed it on the desk. On the screen was a photograph of a clumsily folded paper airplane, its creases uneven beneath the hands of a very small child, with 2 crooked words written across one wing. Flight 1. He remembers, but he remembers it differently. Josie looked down at the screen. In his mind, those 3 months were a camping trip. He still tells the nurse on the 4th floor that when he was little, he and his mother went camping in a car, slept outdoors for 3 months, and counted the stars through the windshield every night. He says it was the happiest time of his life. He even wishes we had stayed longer. She raised one hand to cover her mouth for a moment, then lowered it again. Every time he tells that story, everyone who hears it laughs. Then they turn and look at me, waiting for me to laugh with them, and I do. She didn't cry. She merely sat still, her hands clenched so tightly together that every knuckle had turned white. Everyone tells me I did everything I could. The doctor says it. The social worker says it. Everyone says it. There isn't a single person in this world who blames me. And yet every night I lie awake thinking that if I hadn't left that day, if I had stayed and endured those notices on the door, maybe my son wouldn't have to lie on the 4th floor twice a week. The room remained silent for a very long time. Desmond Rourke didn't tell her she had done everything she could. He didn't tell her it wasn't her fault. He didn't say any of the things everyone else always said. He merely looked out the window toward the stone wall at the end of the garden and spoke in a very quiet voice. When no one accuses you, there's no one who can forgive you either. That kind of guilt is something a person has to carry for a lifetime. Josie raised her eyes to him, and for the first time since the morning the tray fell onto the stone floor, she looked directly at that man's face, at both sides of it, and didn't turn away. Toby's class science fair was scheduled for the following Saturday, and from the moment he learned about it, there was no room in the boy's mind for anything else in the world. On Thursday afternoon, when Josie had to bring him to the mansion again because the babysitter was busy, he found Desmond Rourke sitting at the head of the long table in the ground floor kitchen, with a cup of coffee and a stack of papers before him, though he hadn't turned to the second page in 15 minutes. Toby walked straight over, planted both hands on the edge of the table, and announced that his class performance included dancing, that he needed someone to practice with, because his mother was always busy at home, and the student who sat beside him had stepped on his feet 3 times during rehearsal the day before. "I can't dance," Desmond said. He pointed to the cane resting against the side of his chair, then pointed down at his right leg. He made the gesture neatly and calmly, the same gesture he always used to bring every conversation to an end. Toby looked at the cane, looked at the leg, then looked back at his face, entirely unconvinced. "I walk slowly too," he said. "The nurse says I have to walk slowly, and I'm not allowed to run. Running makes me tired." He shrugged as though he had just resolved the entire matter. "So we can go slowly together. This song is very slow. We don't have to dance fast." And somehow, that reasoning left the man whom the entire South Side was afraid to look directly in the face with nothing to say. The portable record player with its radio tuner was brought down from the reading room and placed on the kitchen counter. Toby turned the dial himself, passing through several bursts of static until he found a station that played old music. Josie stood in the doorway with a cleaning cloth in her hand, and she remained there the entire time, hardly daring to breathe. In a kitchen as large as their entire apartment, beneath a low-hanging lamp, a tall man with a limp held 2 tiny hands and slowly turned to a count of 3. He counted 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, his voice rough and his rhythm wrong. Toby stepped on the toes of his shoes twice, then laughed so hard that he had to sink down onto the floor. He made Desmond turn him beneath one arm, spun too far and collided with a cabinet door, then immediately demanded to try again. He told Desmond to count louder. He told him it was wrong to look down at his feet. He told him he was much better than the boy in his class. By the 3rd song, Toby was tired. He climbed onto the high stool beside the counter, his legs swinging, his breathing a little quick, his cheeks flushed with happiness. "Dance, Mom," he said. Josie smiled. "I'm cleaning the kitchen." "Dance, Mom." He said it more firmly this time, tipping his chin toward the man standing in the center of the room. He hasn't danced enough yet. The song playing was slow, the sound of a guitar crackling through the small old speaker, while a man sang very softly. Josie set the cloth on the table. She stepped forward. Desmond held out his hand, and he kept exactly 1 hand's breadth of distance between them, the polite space people maintained when dancing with a stranger at a church wedding. Josie took half a step forward and reduced that distance by half. Neither of them spoke. He no longer counted. His scarred right hand rested against her back, and she paid no attention to it at all. And perhaps it was that very absence of notice that made his chest tighten. They turned very slowly, barely doing more than shifting their feet, while the speaker continued to crackle. On the high stool, Toby had lowered his cheek onto the counter, his eyes half closed, one hand still holding the edge of his paper. The song ended. Josie released Desmond's hand, went over to lift her son, and carried him into the next room, where she laid him on the sofa. She pulled her coat over him, then stood there for a while watching him sleep, listening to his steady breathing in the darkened room. Then she returned to the kitchen. She returned, and he was still standing in the middle of the kitchen, in the exact place where she had left him. The small speaker had changed to the voice of someone reading the weather report. Neither of them reached out to turn it off. Josie lifted her face. He was looking at her, and he didn't turn the right side of his face away, nor did he retreat half a step into the place the light couldn't reach, as he had done for so many years. She raised her hand and placed it against that cheek, that very cheek, and left it there. Then she rose onto her toes. The record player gave a long burst of static, and from the floor below, through 3 closed doors and a stone staircase, came the sound of breaking glass. The hospital car had collected Toby that afternoon, before dark, for his Thursday evening transfusion, and he was now lying on the 4th floor of St. Bridget Hospital, nearly 6 miles north of the house. All the hourly workers had left by dusk. Only 3 people remained inside the stone mansion in Beverly. The sound of breaking glass had come from the small foyer in the east wing, where there was a tall, arched window. Then silence. Then footsteps on stone. Not 1 pair, but 3. And no one bothered to walk quietly. Desmond Rourke released Josie's hand. He reached for the cane resting against the side of the chair and told her to go into the pantry behind the kitchen and lock the door from the inside. His voice was low and completely calm. She opened her mouth to say something. He looked at her once. She went. On the second floor, at the bend in the east hallway, Bernadette Quillen stood alone, 68 years old, her cardigan thrown hastily over her nightgown. She held the heavy metal flashlight that took 4 batteries and had remained in the hallway cabinet since Mr. Fionn was alive. She stood directly in front of a narrow wooden door in the middle of the hallway, her feet planted slightly apart, the beam from the flashlight trembling across the stone floor. It was the door leading to the attic. "There's no one here," she said. "You have the wrong house." 3 shadows stretched across the stone wall behind her, rising far above her head and reaching all the way to the ceiling. One shadow stepped forward. The flashlight beam lurched, swept across the ceiling once. Then something metal fell onto the stone floor and rolled away. The flashlight remained there, still burning, casting a long strip of light across the floor. The sound of an old woman falling. The sound of the small table against the wall toppling with her. The sound of the porcelain vase upon it shattering. Then silence. And in that silence, from the far end of the hallway, a sound began drawing closer. Tap, drag, tap, drag, very slowly, not quickening by even a single beat. The flashlight on the floor cast its light no higher than waist level, so the first thing to appear wasn't a face, but a hand gripping the steel-capped head of a cane. The light shone upward from below, revealing every ridge across the back of that hand, the hand from which the entire city had turned away for so many years. Desmond Rourke stopped about 4 steps from them. He looked down at the woman lying on the floor. Then he raised his eyes. "You just laid hands on the only person in this world who still calls me by my name." No one had time to answer. What happened afterward was very brief. Josie, standing behind the locked door downstairs, would later remember only the sounds, and she remembered them in their exact order. The sound of shoe soles scraping hard against stone. A single, clean, sharp impact, once, and never repeated. The sound of a body striking the wall and sliding down. The sound of someone running toward the staircase, making it 6 or 7 steps before the armchair at the end of the hallway tipped over and the running stopped. One long breath. Then a metal object fell and slid a great distance across the stone floor. Then nothing. The entire thing lasted no longer than it took to bring a small kettle of water to a boil. When Josie opened the door and ran upstairs, the east hallway was lit only by the beam of the flashlight lying on its side upon the floor. None of the 3 men was still standing. One sat against the wall at the end of the hallway with both arms wrapped around his knees, motionless. The other 2 lay still. The small table had fallen, and pieces of white porcelain were scattered across the stone floor. In the middle of the hallway, Desmond Rourke knelt on one knee beside the old woman, using his bare right hand to lift her head from the stone. "Bertie." She opened her eyes, blinked several times, frowned up at the ceiling, and spoke in the hoarse, irritable voice of someone who had just been awakened from a deep sleep. "That table belonged to your mother." He lowered his head. His shoulders trembled once, only once, and very faintly. "Yes," he said. "I know." Josie knelt on the other side, slipped one hand beneath the older woman's neck, and examined her with fingers trained by 4 years on the 4th floor. She asked where the pain was worst. "Mrs. Quillen said it was in her hip." Josie told her not to move, then took out her phone and called for an ambulance, and while she waited for the call to connect, she looked up at the man kneeling across from her. He wasn't looking at Josie. He wasn't looking at the other 3 men. He was staring at the aged face, resting in the palm of his hand, and upon his own face was something Josie had never seen there before, something she wouldn't be able to name until much later. It was fear. The ambulance took Bernadette Quillen away shortly before midnight, and the rain began to fall just as its 2 red taillights disappeared beyond the first bend in the driveway. Desmond stood beyond the shelter of the porch, on the 2nd step, allowing the rain to pour over the shoulders of his shirt until the fabric across his back was dark with water. He stood there without moving, one hand resting on the head of his cane, his face turned toward the dark grounds. Josie stood beneath the porch roof with her arms wrapped around her elbows. "Come inside," she said. He didn't turn around. "What did the doctor say?" "A fracture at the neck of her femur. At 68, she'll need surgery." She was completely alert, and was already complaining to the nurse about the blanket. Josie paused. "She'll be all right." He said nothing. The rain grew heavier, drumming against the leaves of the oak tree beside the entrance. "There were 7 people that night," he said. Josie went still. "Kessler, the night shift. People always say 4. Some newspapers say 5, depending on which one they read. There were 7. His voice was so even that it sounded as though he were reading an inventory. He had been in the office across the street, about 200 yards away. He ran over. He pulled the first person out through the side door. The second and third came out together, and both of them could still walk. He had to carry the 4th. By the time he reached the 5th, the western section of the roof collapsed. The 6th person was lying near the rolling door, and he dragged that person out by the hem of their shirt. He stopped. Then I went inside one more time. The rain swept sideways across the steps. I stood in there and called her name. I called 3 times. I knew where she was. I knew which entrance she had used. I could even see her flashlight rolling across the floor. I called 3 times, and no one answered. He continued looking into the darkness. Then the beam above me came down. After that, I couldn't walk, so someone else had to pull me out. "Your sister," Josie said softly, 22 years old. She wasn't working the night shift. She only went down there because I asked her to sign a few bills of lading. Josie stepped out from beneath the porch roof, descended the 2 steps, and stood facing him in the rain. Water struck her hair and shoulders. "This entire city says you burned that building," she said. "They printed it again last week. You have 6 living witnesses walking around out there. Why haven't you said anything?" "Because if I defend myself, I have to tell the rest of it." He turned his head and looked at her for the first time. "And I can't tell that part, Miss Marlowe. It's much easier to let people call me the man who burned the warehouse. I can endure that. I can't endure the other." Rainwater ran down one side of his face, over the tightened skin along his neck, and he made no effort to wipe it away. "Go home," he said. "I'll have a car take you. I'm not leaving yet. You're soaked. So are you." Josie didn't move. And then he asked the question he had been holding in his hands for weeks. "What are you going to do with me, Miss Marlowe?" She lifted her face. "How long can you stay?" His voice was no longer steady. "People will look at me, then look at you, and they'll begin to count. They'll count the hospital bills, count the wages I pay you, count the house you're living in. Then they'll say you're here for the money, and they'll be right. You entered this house because of money. You told me some of yourself in the kitchen." "Yes," Josie said. "I came for the money, and I'm not ashamed of a single word of it. My son needs blood transfusions twice a week, and you're the only person in this city who pays me enough that I don't have to choose between the rent and his medicine." She stepped up one stair. "But money isn't the reason I'm standing here tonight, and you know that perfectly well, so don't speak to me in that voice. You don't understand." "I do understand." She pushed a strand of wet hair away from her face. "I understand what you're doing. You're trying to make me leave on my own, so you won't have to be the one who sends me away. You're very good at that. You've been doing it all your life." "Miss Marlowe." "No. You're going to listen until I'm finished." Her voice broke, not because of tears, but because of something that had been held inside her for too long. "You're afraid to let me see your scars. You've stood outside in the rain for half an hour to avoid the places where there's light. You pull your glove higher every time someone walks past. Do you think I haven't noticed? I've been cleaning your house all this time." Her breathing quickened. But you weren't afraid to show me the cold room. You deliberately opened that door. You arranged it yourself so I would be standing at that exact threshold. You used it to test me. You sat in your car outside my kitchen window for an entire night. You haven't hidden that part of yourself from me for even 1 second. She stood straight beneath the rain. You have everything in the wrong order, Mr. Rourke. The thing you're hiding from me doesn't matter to me. The thing you chose to show me is what's frightening. Desmond Rourke said nothing. He stood there in the rain, his hand tightening around the head of his cane, and for those few seconds, Josie saw upon his face the exact thing she had seen in the second-floor hallway when he lifted the old woman's head from the stone. He opened his mouth, then he closed it, and he did the only thing a man like him knew how to do when he could no longer control anything. You don't need to come back tomorrow, he said. I'll pay your wages through the end of the month. I'll have someone write you a letter of recommendation. Wherever you take it, they'll hire you. He turned his back, climbed the steps, and his cane struck the wet stone in 2 uneven beats before the great door closed behind him. Josephine Marlowe stood alone in the courtyard, beneath the rain, before a house whose every window had gone dark. On the 4th day after Josie stopped working at the mansion, the woman in the white coat came to the cafe on the corner of Bank Street, and she knew exactly which table Josie used, what she drank, and what time she arrived, because it was the only cafe in the neighborhood with an electrical outlet beside the window. And Josie had spent 3 mornings there submitting job applications on her phone. The woman pulled out the chair across from her and sat without asking. Miss Marlowe, I'm Constance Wyeth, attorney for the Rourke family. You made tea for me twice. You probably don't remember. I remember, Josie said. Black tea, no sugar, 1 thin slice of lemon. You sat in the small drawing room in the West Wing. Both times were in the afternoon. Constance Wyeth smiled, and something passed very quickly through that smile. Something almost like amusement. She didn't utter a single threat. She opened her slim leather briefcase and placed 3 sets of documents on the table, arranging them in a straight line beside one another. The first was an agreement already prepared by attorneys, under which the entire loan in Josephine Marlowe's name would be purchased and paid in full by a third party, reducing the balance to 0 and clearing her credit record within 60 days. The second was a letter of confirmation from a private medical center in Minnesota, a facility with its own bone marrow bank and a lifetime funding program for patients under 18. The third was a lease for a 2-bedroom apartment, paid 3 years in advance. Read them, she said. Take your time and read them carefully. I'm in no hurry. Josie read. She read all 3 sets from beginning to end, tracing 1 finger along the edge of each page exactly as she had traced the contract in the Rourke kitchen several months earlier. Then she lowered her hand to the table. In exchange for what? A sworn statement. Constance Wyeth took out a 4th set of documents. At the end of that month, there would be a meeting of the shareholders, and there was also an ongoing investigation into the operations at the Halstead docks. Both matters required testimony from someone who had worked inside that house. All Josie had to do was write down what she had seen with her own eyes in the room on the 2nd floor of the East Wing on the afternoon of March 19th. Who had been present? Who had been kneeling? What Mr. Rourke had said. You want me to lie? No. The woman tilted her head, and her voice softened until it sounded almost sincere. That's precisely what makes this difficult, Miss Marlowe. I don't need you to invent a single word. I only need you to describe exactly what you saw. Did you see a man kneeling on the rug? Yes. Did you hear Mr. Rourke speak about trailers with people inside them? Yes. Did you hear him ask who had provided the dye for the seal? Yes. She pushed the paper toward Josie. You won't have to lie. You'll only have to tell the truth. And your son will be placed on a waiting list at a facility far better than the one where he is being treated now. Then she placed 1 final item on the table. It was a photograph taken from a distance and slightly blurred. A man was carrying a child up the hospital steps, and on the sidewalk behind him lay an abandoned cane. Traffic on Archer was obstructed in a very peculiar way that morning, don't you think? Josie stared at the photograph for a long time. She thought of the 3 vehicles blocking the road like 3 chess pieces placed by a hand that knew exactly what it was doing. She thought of the 3 drivers standing on the sidewalk smoking, with not one of them arguing with anyone. She thought of the man standing in the rain, telling her she didn't need to return the next morning. How long do I have? 3 days. 3 days later, Josephine Marlowe called Constance Wyeth and said she had signed. They met again at the same cafe. Josie placed a handwritten statement on the table. 6 pages in all, the letters round and even, without a single crossed-out word. Constance Wyeth opened it and began to read. She finished the 1st page, her face still calm. She read the 2nd. Around the middle of the 3rd page, she slowed down. What is this? She said. It's my statement. I wrote down exactly what I saw without omitting a single word, just as you told me. Josie sat with her back straight. I included that room. I clearly stated that there were 5 other people besides me. I described the man kneeling on the rug. I recorded the exact words about the trailers with people inside them, as well as the question about the dye for the seal. Keep reading. I didn't leave out a single word that might help him. Then what is everything from page 3 onward? More things I saw. Josie placed her hand on the statement. I'm a house cleaner, Miss Wyeth. For weeks, I cleaned that house from the basement all the way to the attic. I know who sat in which room, what time they were there, and who sat with them. No one pays attention to the person holding the cleaning cloth. People simply keep talking. She turned to the 4th page and rotated the statement toward the woman. On the afternoon of March 19th, the exact afternoon Constance had asked her to describe, Constance had been inside the house. She arrived before 2 o'clock. She sat in the small drawing room in the west wing, and Josie made tea for her at 10 minutes past 2. She hadn't come alone. The man accompanying her had salt and pepper hair, wore a gray wool coat, and ordered black coffee without sugar. He left his leather eyeglass case on the arm of the chair, and Josie was the person who carried it all the way to the end of the driveway to return it to him. 2 initials were embossed on that case, the letters A and R. Constance Wyeth said nothing. I also included what happened in the 2nd floor hallway, Josie continued. That Saturday morning you had an appointment with Mr. Rourke at 11 o'clock, and you arrived 40 minutes early. I know because I was the one who opened the gates for you, and you said you could find your own way upstairs and didn't need anyone to escort you. She drew a breath. The photograph published in the newspaper was taken through the opening of a door in that exact hallway on that exact morning. The woman closed the statement very slowly. Do you understand that you have just identified yourself as a witness to something that could constitute a criminal offense? Yes, I understand, Josie nodded. I also included my part. I clearly stated that I opened the drawer and photographed the ledger. I wrote down who told me to do it. And I clearly stated that I never sent those photographs. I didn't hide anything. Who have you given this statement to? I've already filed it. Yesterday morning, at the United States Attorney's Office on Dearborn Street. They gave me a receipt number. Josie pulled the pages back toward herself. What I placed on this table is only my handwritten copy. I brought it for you to read, because you said you needed to know what I had seen. Now you know. She stood and put on her wool coat, whose elbows were patched with thread of a different color. Do you know why I didn't sign your papers? She said. It isn't because I'm a good person. It's because I sat and read them for 3 nights, and I realized that the only names anywhere in those papers were mine and my son's. Your name wasn't there at all. You intended to walk away from this without leaving a single word of your own on paper. She picked up her handwritten statement. The only things I have in this world are my memory and my name. I won't trade either of them for anything. Then she walked out of the cafe. 6 weeks later, when the 6-page statement was compared with bank transaction records, investigators traced the number that had called Josie from another state, then traced the person who had paid for that number. Cole Marlowe was arrested in Indiana during the same operation, and he told them everything he knew in less than an hour, because that was simply the kind of man he was. Bernadette Quillen was brought home in the 3rd week, walking on crutches, her hip joint held together with screws. The first thing she did after lowering herself into the armchair in the reading room was ask someone to bring down the padlocked tin box from the attic, the box whose key she had kept for all those years. Desmond Rourke stood beside the window. On the table in the center of the room lay 2 sets of documents that the prosecutor's office had just sent to his attorneys, including a copy of a 6-page handwritten statement he had read 3 times in 2 days. A servant brought down the box and left. Mrs. Quillen unlocked it with trembling fingers. Inside, beneath a folded piece of canvas, was a rectangular steel case, about the size of a toolbox, its military green paint peeling away in patches. A thick yellowed evidence seal was affixed across the lid, stamped with the city fire department's mark, a typed date, and a case number. The seal remained intact. What is this? Desmond asked. The incident channel recorder. She placed both hands on the lid. Every fire command vehicle had one. It recorded every communication transmitted over the channel throughout an incident, not only the voices of the firefighters, but everything broadcast on that frequency, including the handheld radios used by the building's night shift, because at that time they shared a channel with the local rescue unit at night. They collected it as evidence that night. They sealed it and placed it in the case file. Her finger traced the edge of the yellowed paper. Then the case was closed. No conclusion. No one sued anyone. Once a file is closed that way, evidence like this isn't opened again. They leave it in storage until the retention period expires, then destroy it. Why is it here? Because I took it. She looked up at him. There was a young man working in the evidence room then. His father had worked for your father for 20 years. I asked him for it, and he gave it to me. That was all. If they want to punish me now, they can. I'm 68 years old. In the hallway, the pendulum clock struck once. How long have you kept it? She didn't answer immediately. She looked down at the steel case, and her aged hand moved very slowly across the cold metal, as though touching the shoulder of an old friend. Since that night, Desmond Rourke turned fully toward her. He said nothing. He stood beside the window, with one hand resting on the head of his cane, and something was slowly rising across his face. Bernadette Quillen sat quietly and waited for it to come, waiting like someone who had long known that one day she would have to sit in that exact chair and face that exact look. The night I was in surgery, he said. Yes. The week they buried her. You already had this. Yes. For 9 years, the entire city has printed my name in its newspapers, and this has been inside the house. In the attic, she said, directly above your head. For 9 years, Desmond took 2 steps. His cane struck the wooden floor in 2 hard beats. Then he stopped, and the hand gripping its steel-capped head tightened until every ridge along its back turned white. Do you know how long I've searched for this? His voice broke, and for the first time in years, it was no longer steady. Do you know how much I paid attorneys to petition for the case to be reopened? 3 times. 3 times they told me the evidence had passed its retention period and could no longer be traced. I sat in this house. I ate at the same table with you. You poured water for me. You called me by my name while that thing lay only a few feet of wood above my head. That's right, she said. Why? She looked up. Her eyes were red, but her voice didn't tremble. Because you had no one then. Desmond stood frozen. Let me finish. Afterward, if you want to send me away, I'll go. I have a place to stay with my niece in Oaklawn. She braced both hands on the arms of the chair and sat straighter. The night they wheeled you out of surgery, I sat in that hallway for 3 days. When you woke, you didn't ask about your leg. You didn't ask about your shoulder or your neck. You asked me one question. You asked where your sister was. Then, from that day forward, you didn't speak a single word to anyone for 7 weeks. She exhaled. During those 7 weeks, I kept this box in the drawer of my bedside table. Every night, I thought I would give it to you the next morning. Then morning came. I looked at you lying there, and I put it away again. You had no right to make that decision for me. No, I didn't. She nodded. But listen to me. If I had given you this then, you would have heard a name on it, and you would have heard that name while lying in a hospital bed with a ruined leg and a sister who had just been buried. You were 25. You had no wife, no children, no one in this world you had to return to. Her voice broke. You would have gone looking for that person the same night, Desmond. I know you. I knew your father, too. You would have gone, and you wouldn't have come back. There would be 2 graves in the cemetery now instead of 1. Only the sound of rain beyond the window remained in the room. Then why are you giving it to me now? She looked at him for a long time. Because now you have someone to keep living for. You didn't then. Now you do. She pushed the steel case across the table. Open it. You can open it alone, or I can sit here with you. I'll do whatever you tell me. But open it before you decide what to do with me. That is all I ask. He didn't open it inside the house. He had the device taken to the empty concrete foundation where the Kessler building had once stood. A place where nothing remained now but the foundation itself. Several steel columns cut off at their bases, and weeds growing through the cracks. Bernadette Quillen sat on a folding chair the driver had brought, her crutches beside her. Josie was there as well, because he had called her the night before, his first call since the night in the rain, and he had said only one sentence, that the next day he was opening something beneath the site of the old building. And if she could come, she should. It took the technician nearly an hour to connect the power and route the signal through a portable speaker. Then he stepped back, Nundidkin pressed the button. The first thing that emerged was static, thick and white, the sound of a device that had lain silent for 9 years. Then came the dispatcher reading out coordinates, then sirens, then the overlapping voices of men, short and sharp, calling out hose numbers and engine numbers. Then something enormous sounded in the background, followed by several people shouting at once, and cutting through all of it, the voice of a young woman came over the night shift channel. Desmond Rourke straightened. The voice said the side door was clear. It said everyone had made it out. She was breathing hard. Wind struck the microphone. She said she was outside in the yard, that she had escaped. Then she went silent for several seconds. Then she began to count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Then she said Mr. Otis wasn't there. She called dispatch. She asked whether anyone had seen Mr. Otis. No one answered over the channel. There was only static and the sound of sirens. Then the voice spoke one final sentence, saying it with a strange calmness, the way someone speaks to herself while tying her shoes. "I know where he usually sits. I'm going back inside." After that, there was nothing on the channel but static. The technician reached out and turned off the speaker. No one told him to do it. He did it on his own. Desmond didn't move. He stood in the middle of the empty concrete foundation, with the wind from the lake blowing across it, and the cane in his hand slowly slipped down, touched the ground, then fell. He didn't pick it up. He collapsed, not because he chose to sit, but because both knees had abandoned him, and he sat heavily on the concrete among the weeds. For 9 years, he had believed one thing. He believed his sister had been trapped inside from the beginning, that she had been lying somewhere in the smoke waiting for him, that he had been a few dozen seconds too late, that if he had pulled out the 5th and 6th people a little faster, he would have reached her in time. He had built the entire remainder of his life upon that belief. He allowed a whole city to call him the man who burned the warehouse, because compared with the name he called himself inside his mind, that name almost felt merciful. But his sister had made it outside. She had stood in the yard. She had breathed clean air. She had been safe. Then she went back inside because there was a 62-year-old night cleaner working without papers, a name absent from the payroll, and not one person in that yard had counted him. If she hadn't gone back inside, there wouldn't have been a single person in the world who went looking for him. She went back because of the very thing Desmond had taught her when she was a little girl. Leave no one behind. Never leave anyone behind. The man whom the entire South Side was afraid to call by name sat on the concrete foundation of the burned building, buried his face in both hands, and wept. At first, there was no sound. Then it broke from him, dry and ragged, the weeping of a man who hadn't cried in 9 years, and no longer knew how to do it neatly. Josie walked over. She said nothing. She didn't place a hand on his shoulder. She didn't tell him it wasn't his fault. She didn't say any of the things people always said. She merely sat down on the concrete beside him, wrapped her arms around her knees, and remained there. They sat that way for a very long time. The wind moved through the weeds. Out on the water, a freighter sounded 3 long blasts as it left the channel. Much later, Desmond raised his head. He didn't wipe his face. He turned toward the folding chair. What was the other man's name? Mrs. Quillen opened her mouth, then closed it again. "I don't know," she said. "He wasn't on the payroll. He wasn't in the gate log. No one came to claim him. The newspapers counted 4 injured people at the time. They never mentioned him once." She lowered her head. I asked. The night shift workers only remembered that there was an old man who did some cleaning, whose wife had died a long time before, and who had asked to work a few night shifts for cash. That was all. Desmond looked out across the empty concrete before him. "He worked several night shifts here," he said. "Then he died here, and there isn't a single place on this land where his name is written." No one answered. Then he turned toward Josie. His face was still wet, and he no longer tried to hide it or turn the right side away. "You're 27, he said. "You have an entire lifetime ahead of you. One day, you may want another child. That's normal. Everyone does. There's nothing to be embarrassed about." He looked down at his hands. "I can't give you that, Miss Marlowe. They told me when I was 25. They were very clear. There is no possibility at all. I'm telling you now because I don't want the day to come when you're sitting in my kitchen and only then learn the truth." Josie was silent for a very long time. Then she spoke in a perfectly ordinary voice that sounded almost irritated. "Are you sitting here counting all the things you don't have?" He looked up. "I already have a child," she said. "He doesn't need anyone to bring him into the world again. That was taken care of a long time ago. What he needs is someone who stays." She turned to look at him. "Do you know what staying means, Mr. Rourke? It means twice a week. It means remembering which nurse is on duty that day. It means remembering to bring paper so he can fold airplanes. It means sitting in the 4th floor hallway until they wheel him out. It means doing that year after year without ever asking anyone to praise you for it." She shrugged. "For weeks now, that boy has been telling everyone on the 4th floor that he knows a man who can dance to a count of 3. He told the nurse. He told the doctor. He even told the cleaning woman. Everyone on the 4th floor knows that the man walks slowly. They know he counts the rhythm wrong. They know he let Toby step on the toes of his shoes twice without scolding him once." She looked directly at him. "He hasn't asked me even once whether you're the man who brought him into this world. He's 7. He doesn't think about things like that." Desmond Rourke looked at her. "Don't say things like that here," he said softly. "I'm not very steady right now." "Then stay seated," Josie said. "No one is asking you to stand." The name on the recording was Otis Pyle. The initials on the eyeglass case were A and R. 3 days later, the Rourke family's attorneys matched them to the 3 pages stuck together by dampness in the brown leather ledger. And after that, everything came crashing down very quickly. Ambrose Renshaw had been the superintendent of the Kessler building during the final years of Mr. Fion's life. Inside that building was an old safe containing the company's original records, and for 2 years, Renshaw had been moving goods through the 3rd floor. On the night before an inventory, he locked the northern fire exit from the outside and set fire to a row of wooden shelves. He locked the door so no one would have time to carry anything out. He thought the night shift had already ended. Now he operated his own network, using forged bills of lading, bearing the name Rourke Freight, to move cargo through the Halstead cold storage docks. And on Tuesday night of that week, Trailer 47 was waiting in the yard, its documents declaring that it contained used agricultural machinery. Before going down to the yard, Desmond Rourke composed exactly one message to Josie. It contained no explanation, and not one unnecessary word. Only the name of the dock, the trailer number, and one final line telling her to take it directly to the district police station instead of calling, because a telephone call would cost 15 minutes while they asked who she was. He sent it because he had considered the possibility that he might not come back out. And a man like him never entered a place like that without leaving a copy of everything he knew in the hands of someone he trusted. At night, the cold storage yard glowed yellow beneath banks of high lights, and the engines of the cranes moving along their rails sounded like the breathing of an enormous animal. Renshaw stood beside a pickup truck at the end of Row D, his hair salt and pepper, a gray wool coat draped over one arm. He recognized the limp before he saw the face. "Rourke, it's been a long time." "The northern fire exit," Desmond said. "You locked it from the outside." Renshaw didn't deny it. That was the worst part. He merely slipped one hand into his trouser pocket and shrugged, the shrug of a man who had lived with what he had done for so long that it no longer weighed anything. "I didn't know anyone was still inside." "I know." Desmond stood motionless. "That is why you're still alive today." Then came a pounding sound from Trailer 47. 3 knocks. Then 3 more. Desmond turned his head toward it. Renshaw followed his gaze. And in that exact half-second, both men understood the same thing, that during the next 3 minutes, only one of 2 things could happen. Renshaw ran. Desmond Rourke didn't chase him. He didn't even look after him once. He turned his back on the man who had burned the Kessler building, the man who had taken from him a sister, a leg, and 9 years of his life, and moved toward the base of the crane as quickly as his right leg allowed. After about 10 steps, he threw his cane aside because it was slowing him down. He climbed the steel stairs to the control cabin with both hands gripping the railings, placing his weight on his arms to spare his leg, 1 step at a time. When the operator inside the glass cabin turned around, he saw a man with a deathly pale face standing in the doorway, pointing toward Row D and speaking exactly 1 sentence. "Stop. There are people inside." The crane hook stopped less than 3 feet above the roof of the trailer. They cut the seal and opened Trailer 47 before 11 o'clock that night. Inside were 14 people, all of them adults. They were helped down, wrapped in blankets, and taken for medical examinations. Not one person died. Not one. At the far end of the yard, Renshaw ran along the passage between 2 rows of containers toward the side gate he had used hundreds of times. The gate stood open, and beyond it, 4 police cars blocked the way with their lights turning. Beside the duty sergeant stood a woman wearing a wool coat whose elbows were patched with thread of a different color, still holding the phone displaying a message with the name of the dock and the trailer number. He ran straight into the middle of them. 9 years earlier, inside that building, Desmond Rourke had brought out 6 people and lost 1. That night, he brought out 14 and lost no one. He sat on the steel steps at the base of the crane while someone bandaged the hand the railing had cut open, and he couldn't rise until someone brought back his cane. When they led Renshaw past him, he stopped, bent down toward the man sitting on the steel step, and murmured something with a smile. Desmond didn't rise. He didn't shout. He didn't lift a hand. He merely raised his head, looked directly into Renshaw's face, and spoke quietly enough that none of the police officers could hear. "You'll be inside for a very long time, Renshaw. I have friends in there. I won't ask them to do anything." He paused. "I'll only tell them who you are. That is all." The smile vanished from Ambrose Renshaw's face before they pushed him onward. Josie walked over and sat on the steel step beside Desmond. Across the yard, they were helping the final person out of the trailer. The police lights swept over their faces. Blue, then red. Blue, then red. "I heard what you said to him." "Yes. You aren't planning to become even a little kinder, are you?" Desmond looked toward Row D, where 14 people stood wrapped in blankets beneath the highlights. "No," he said. "I'm only changing direction." The board meeting took place on the final Thursday morning of the month, in an 11th floor conference room overlooking the river, with 15 people seated around a long table. Constance Wyeth sat at the opposite end. She already knew that the 6-page handwritten statement was lying on the desk of a federal prosecutor. She knew her name was in it, and when a woman like her knew she was about to lose everything, the only thing left to do was make certain the other person lost first. She allowed the financial report to conclude. Then she opened her leather briefcase and removed a file that had been locked in a safe for 4 months. "Before the vote," she said, "I believe everyone should know something." She pushed the file into the center of the table. Inside was a certified copy of a Lake County family court ruling dated during a winter more than 30 years earlier, followed by an amended birth certificate. And beneath that, records from a children's care facility in Gary, Indiana. "The man sitting at the other end of this table doesn't have a single drop of Rourke blood in him, Mr. Fionn adopted him when he was 4 years old. There is no blood relationship. There is no lineage at all. For all these years, we have sat here discussing the preservation of a family legacy, and from the very beginning, the person entrusted with the keys to that legacy was an outsider." The room fell silent. Someone set a coffee cup down on its saucer a little too hard. 15 faces turned in the same direction. In the row of chairs along the rear wall, a woman in a wool coat sat with her back straight and both hands resting on her thighs. Desmond Rourke braced both hands on the table and rose. He didn't look at Constance Wyeth first. He lifted his eyes and found Josie in the back row, held her gaze for exactly 1 heartbeat, and she gave him a very slight nod. Then he reached across with his left hand. He moved very slowly. He removed the black leather glove from his right hand. The glove he had worn for 9 years, inside the house and out on the street, at funerals and weddings. The glove no one had ever seen him remove in public. He pulled it from one finger at a time, slipped it free of his hand, folded it, then placed it on the wooden table. His right hand lay bare beneath the conference room lights, exposed before 15 pairs of eyes. The ridges running along the back of it, the patches of taut, shining skin, the map of a night the entire city had described wrongly for 9 years. Not one person in the room turned away. For the first time in his life, not one person in the room turned away. "That is correct," he said. He placed his right hand on the table, his fingers spread, as naturally as though he were setting down a sheet of paper. "That man didn't bring me into this world. One winter, he drove down to Gary and chose me. I was 4 years old. He wasn't obligated to do it. No law required it. No record book compelled him. No blood forced him to enter that building and sign his name on a sheet of paper. He looked around the table, meeting the eyes of each person in turn. He chose. Then he stayed. 30 years. He turned toward Constance Wyeth. "You thought you had just brought me down. In truth, you have just proven the very thing I intended to tell everyone at this table this morning." His voice didn't rise by even a single note. "The organization you're sitting within was built upon a choice, Miss Wyeth, not upon blood. The same is true of the 400 people receiving their wages out there. Nothing here comes from lineage. It comes from one man deciding to take in a child who wasn't his own, then standing behind him until the day he died." He picked up the file, closed it, and placed it in front of her. "You brought this out to say that I have no right to sit here, but what you have just read aloud to 15 people is proof that this family knows how to welcome an outsider and keep that person within it. To me, that is the most beautiful thing anyone could say about a family." He didn't put the glove back on. He sat through the rest of the meeting with his right hand bare. When the vote was over, he left it that way, and when he passed the row of chairs along the wall on his way out, it remained uncovered. Josie rose and followed him into the hallway. "You aren't putting it back on?" Desmond Rourke looked down at his hand beneath the hallway lights. "No," he said. "It took me 34 years to remove it. I think I'll leave it this way for a while." Josie returned to work at the mansion the following week. One afternoon, while cleaning the study, she opened the second drawer on the left, the drawer she had sworn to herself she would never touch again. The brown leather ledger was no longer there. In its place was a thick stack of paper, and she had to look twice before she understood what she was seeing. They were Toby's paper airplanes, every one of them. Each had been unfolded, smoothed flat, and stacked in the exact order of the number written on its wing. Flight 38, Flight 41, Flight 44. Some of the sheets had once been crumpled, and later pressed flat beneath something heavy, and the old wrinkles still lay quietly beneath the freshly smoothed paper. Josie sat down with the stack in her hands, and turned through the pages one by one. When she reached the sheet at the bottom, the very first one, she found a small line written in ink in the upper right corner, in a man's handwriting that trembled slightly where the letters joined. The first person who didn't turn away. She sat in that room for a very long time. There had been a hospital bill he paid in full one morning with 2 telephone calls, and even then, she had known that for him, it was as easy as reaching out to extinguish a light. But sitting alone behind a closed door, bending over to smooth every paper airplane made by a child who wasn't his own, doing it for months without saying a word to anyone, that was something the man had never carried naturally within himself, and he had been forced to learn it from the beginning, like a grown man learning how to hold a pen. 2 years later, on the empty concrete foundation where the Kessler building had once stood, a 2-story building rose with pale walls and wide windows. Inside was a free pediatric hematology center open to every child in Chicago, asking no questions about insurance, documents, or what their parents did for a living. Toby now carried the Rourke name. He had found a matching bone marrow donor in the spring of that year. On the wall to the right of the entrance was a bronze plaque, and the name Rourke appeared nowhere upon it. Instead, it bore the name of a 62-year-old man who had worked night shifts for cash, a name that for 9 years had never appeared in a payroll ledger, a gate log, or a newspaper. The name one man had spent 2 years searching for through churches, civil records, old lists, and elderly people who still remembered the neighborhood as it once had been, until at last he found it. One morning, a visitor from another state came to tour the center, and when they shook hands, the man looked down and hesitated in the same way people always did. Desmond Rourke wore a shirt with the sleeves rolled up that day, his right hand bare beneath the sunlight, and he didn't pull it away. Toby Rourke, 9 years old, was sitting on the steps folding paper when he looked up. "That's my dad," he said calmly, as though giving the visitor directions. His hand became like that when he pulled 6 people out of a fire. My dad was the last person to go inside. Then he lowered his head, wrote a number on the wing, and released the airplane. In the hallways of the stone mansion in Beverly, the sound the entire household had once used to know he was coming was heard no more. It wasn't because his leg had healed. That leg would never heal. He still walked with a limp, still leaned to one side, and still suffered whenever the weather changed. He simply no longer tried to hide it, and people stopped lowering their eyes, and they began greeting him by name, because in the end, a human being isn't measured by what they are capable of bringing into this world, nor by the blood flowing through their veins, and certainly not by what was carved into their flesh on the darkest night of their life. A person is measured by what they choose to carry on their shoulders, by the people beside whom they decide to remain when no law requires them to stay, and by the name they are willing to spend 2 years searching for simply so they can engrave it on a bronze plaque for someone who is no longer here. Family isn't something we are given. It is something we choose and hold on to every day. And scars, whether they lie upon the skin or deep within the heart, have never been a measure of a person's worth, because behind almost every scar is a story of courage that the world was too quick to turn away from and too hurried to stop and hear. This life would be far gentler if each of us were willing to look a little longer before turning away, and willing to remain a little longer beside those who have no one else to stay with them. If this story touched your heart, please leave a like, share it with someone you believe needs to hear something warm today, and subscribe to our channel so another story of kindness can reach you each day. How did Desmond and Josie's story make you feel? Which moment moved you most deeply? Please leave a few words in the comments below. We sincerely hope to hear the feelings that come from the deepest places in your heart. May you and your family always enjoy abundant health, happiness, and peace each day. Goodbye for now, and we'll see you again in the next video.